To unmute myself again. Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Graham. And obviously, thank you to all of our panel members for joining us this morning. I think that's been a really interesting set of different perspectives, but actually lots of kind of themes that have run throughout. So we're going to try and pick up on some of those kind of key themes and questions that have come through. As Graham says, if you have got additional questions that you think, as obviously our panel members are responding, or that you haven't yet submitted, then do keep doing that, and I will try and keep multitasking by looking across at the Q&A sections and also kind of my own notes of where we've got to so far. But let's kick off. In terms of, there's been a number of questions around the role of community and community collaboration. We've got a whole session on Wednesday, which is very much focused on exactly that theme and important kind of priority in this. But I think given our focus today, particularly in terms of scaling up retrofit programs, about bringing more flexibility through devolution, and being able to really kind of work on our program delivery opportunities. I want to just kind of focus on that aspect in this question, and it's probably going to start with George from a regional perspective, and then Dan kind of bringing that kind of Birmingham perspective, if I may. But I just wondered if I could kind of ask you both, and George to start with, how you're kind of baking in, if that's the right phrase, that kind of community collaboration approach into the design and development of the schemes that you've been talking about, because I think that's definitely something but that Elizabeth, Marta and Nigel have picked up, and I think a really important point. So over to you, George.
Without wanting to sort of pass the buck totally to Dan and the local authorities, actually I think that a lot of the best activity in this area is driven by local authorities who know their areas. So you could point to Birmingham's work without wanting to steal Dan's thunder, on sustainable warmth competition with MEC and retrofit-focused Heath as a good example of how collaboration between a local authority and a community group can support people all the way through that customer journey. There's also the work that's happening, community engagement through the Brockmore Net Zero neighbourhood. I mentioned the local Net Zero Accelerator and the Net Zero neighbourhoods, and why they're important to devolution is it's a different cross-tenure community-based approach to doing retrofit, rather than okay, well, we need to find some off-gas properties, or we need to find some social rented homes. So that creates an opportunity for that community engagement and participation to take place, which will necessarily involve community groups. You know, a longer term vision might be that actually we have a fund set up, which includes devolved funding and other finance from elsewhere, that will allow motivated community groups to gain access to the capacity and the resources that they'll need to build out their own projects. And those can, but we're not there yet. I think there's a need to sort of recognise that we need to get there in stages. So I'd say one of the first stages is a place-based approach to retrofit, which may or may not be net zero neighbourhoods, probably led and coordinated by local authorities at this stage, and bringing in participation from community groups and making sure that they're adequately resourced. And I think through devolved funding, the work that we're doing on Net Zero Accelerator and Net Zero Neighbourhoods, we have an opportunity to do that. It's about, I suppose, us helping to create the framework with local authorities then running with that and bringing in community groups.
Lovely, thanks George. And Dan, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks, good pass there, George. I think, yeah, obviously George mentioned they worked on sustainable warmth and the project that we delivered in Balsall Heath, Acots Green and Tyseley. And there were a lot of successes there, but there's more than that. We learned a huge amount. And I think Nigel's on the call, who was one of our partners in delivering this programme. And we continue to work with likes of Nigel, with Acots Green, Retrofit Balsall Heath and MEC, who are our community delivery partners on that project, to really understand from their point of view, what more can we do? What do we need to be doing better? I think it's really important that we really understand that before we start on future projects. So I think from a Birmingham perspective, we recognise the importance of really baking in the community support role right from the very beginning. It needs to be part of the project as it develops, right from it being an idea through to the final delivery. Really important that community groups are there to support to support the engagement, but also support people through that journey. So we really recognise that, to the point that a large part of why we're trying to scale up the eco program is, a huge part is to deliver more retrofit. But another part of that is to actually create an income stream which we can use to financially support some of our community groups, to actually get out in the communities, be there to actually work with local people, drive demand through that by building trust in communities, but also helping people through the process, because it can be very complicated. And a lot of the people, those most vulnerable in the communities, are better reached by our community partners rather than by the council or through other forms of marketing. So it's absolutely critical that we continue that program. And we've got time before the devolution program really kicks off. We've got time now to actually build that network of community partners and understand better how we work together to make sure it's absolutely part of everything that we do.
Great, thanks Dan, and thanks George for those kind of reflections. I think that's really helpful. So thinking more now to perhaps the kind of housing provider side of things, I wondered, Rob, if I could come to you, because I think something that you said in your presentation around the role of the kind of housing providers, be that local authorities or housing associations, was really, really important. So you spoke about the importance of providers retaining control over critical decision making. And I just wondered whether you could expand on that in terms of what do you think the core skills within those organisations need to be to support successful delivery of programmes?
Yeah, I mean, particularly on sort of initially SHDF Wave 1, I mean, procurement was an issue, which obviously I sort of expanded on a little bit earlier, but I think with whether it be an RP, local authority, I think because the sector is still a fairly new sector, the in-house team of the local authority and the RP for that matter, they're obviously used to stock management programs, etc., but retrofit obviously is something completely different. And I found, particularly from a project management and perhaps from a financial control, those in-house skills have particularly been there. So that they've become more reliant on the contractor who's perhaps they've worked with for the last 3 or 4 years on the existing framework, where that level of responsibility has been retained by the contractor stroke installer. I think that's resulted in sort of things like escalated costs, and that lack of control ultimately when the assessment's carried out, because ultimately the stock is either the local authority or the RPs. It's not the contractors. So when it comes down to actually selecting cost-efficient measures, that decision needs to be made by the RP stroke local authority. It's just that level of control. I mean, if we're looking at whole load retrofit, to control costs in what we can do now leading through to net zero, I fail to see that, if that choice isn't made by the RP or local authority, it should definitely not be made by the contractor.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I think that's a really important reflection. And certainly, obviously, the kind of lessons and experience that we've been gaining over the recent kind of programmes is definitely kind of supporting, I think, that message as well. So thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to I think George on some of the kind of detail, because I think I'm trying to kind of start at the kind of global and then kind of maybe make some more kind of specific technical questions to the panel. But I think there were quite a few kind of queries around, I think, how the practical application of the DEVO deal might work. And obviously I know details still being worked up. But a question that came through was, firstly, could you clarify the timescales you're working to in terms of getting scheme information, bidding criteria, etc., announced. And then secondly, obviously you referenced that local authorities would no longer be bidding into the competitive funding round for SHGF, etc. But does that also apply to social landlords in the West Midlands Combined Authority area as well? So timescales first, and then how the bidding process or Devo deal kind of will work in practice.
Yeah, timescales, the big question, so funding quantum, like how much money we're going to get, how it's calculated, and the outcomes framework, what we're held to account. So those are the big questions that are going to be agreed by the end of June. And after that, it's a question of us building out and working out how it would work best in order to give people greater flexibility. In terms of bidding criteria, I sort of don't like the term bidding, because as I said, our proposal is to have a process of allocation. So an organisation or a group of organisations, perhaps when it comes to housing associations, would have a pot into which they can submit pipeline proposals, draw down funding until that pot is used up, and at some point during that 3-year period, we'd have to work out, okay, well, if we're not going to use up all the funding in one area, do we put that back in centrally? Do we reallocate it? So it should provide an incentive for people the clarity they need to go away, develop projects to the stage where they are sufficiently well developed to get funding, and we're reducing risk of underspend. That's sort of, there's a lot of underspend on existing government schemes. That's a big risk for us. We'd need to spend the money and spend it well. So from June, we'd be seeing a lot more detail. I'd hope to have something that's a lot more detailed in the autumn. We've got a visit from Department for Energy this Wednesday to present to them our proposals and outline about how we run those things. So until we kind of get that green light and actually also get the resource in to start working on those things, it's going to take a little bit of time. So say September, October's realistic to get some more detail. We'll need to do a lot more consultation as well. We know we have been consulting with local authorities, we need to consult with housing associations, and of course we also have public sector decarbonisation scheme. So that's sort of much wider consultation in an area where at the moment combined authority hasn't been really active. How would it work for housing associations? That is a question that we need to resolve. We expect that housing associations will be included, but for housing associations that have housing stock both inside and outside the West Midlands, it's unclear exactly how that will work. So is it that, for example, a housing association that has stock both inside and outside the area can apply for SHGF Wave 3 for homes that are outside the area, but for anything that's happening inside the West Midlands, they'd have to apply for funding through the devolved funding pot. That's one way of doing it. Those boundaries just need to be agreed still with government, but my expectation is that housing associations will be included. The difficulty is working out how it's going to work for those with stock both inside and outside the area.
Okay, thanks George. So I think more information to follow, and I guess this is the first of its kind, so there's still quite a lot of detail to work through as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the bigger questions are taking a little bit longer than I would like to resolve. So we're sort of pushing on those now, and also we're not trying to not let that hold us up too much, so that we're starting to put in place things like, well, a trust mark lodgement, for example, the sort of practical but detailed thing. Currently for SHGF, there's a specific tag for the data warehouse. So we'll need to have our own, set of regional devolved funding tags as well. That's in the process of being set up. So we're dealing with some of those more detailed things as well. There's quite a lot outside of the big picture stuff that needs to be set up, not least, we're not set up in a way to administer, well, we are set up as an organisation to administer funding, but we haven't done this. So there's a lot of things to work out around things like guidance, how we manage applications, all of that sort of thing. Yeah, it's an exciting time. I sort of look forward to being able to tell you a bit more a few months' time.
No, I would second that. It's hugely exciting for the region, and obviously kind of keen to support anything we can to kind of help smooth that process of introducing this as an approach. So thank you very much, George. There's a question that's kind of come through that relates to something that I was keen to ask Becky from a Ferb Now perspective. Becky, you introduced kind of Ferb Now as supporting households who are not eligible for grant funding. I just wondered if you could just give us some sense as to, in your view, how large that market is, because we've talked a lot about grant-funded programmes, but of course you're targeting a cohort which is most likely quite a lot bigger than that. But also a related question is that by virtue of the fact that that's not grant-funded, you are starting with house, looking at the whole range of opportunities and therefore have innate flexibility baked into how you can approach this. So I wondered whether, given that we're talking a lot about the need for flexibility in funding, what important flexibility lessons can we gain from your approach with the able to pay market? Or maybe it's not the able to pay, it's just those who are not eligible for grant funding.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ellie. And we would love to be able to support some of the grant programs. I'll answer the question about flexibility and then talk a bit more about the broader opportunity. And part of the reason why we've started with the self-funded is there is that more flexibility because we do not have to comply with some of the requirements like George just spoke about, Trustmark Data Warehouse, and the requirements and the costs that are embedded into that process. And the question that we start with is, does that provide value to the homeowner in the process to ultimately get more retrofit projects installed? And at the moment, it doesn't massively deliver on the impact of that when it comes to individual homeowners. And it means we've got a little bit more flexibility in the process. So actually today in Birmingham, we're running a focus group with people who are at various stages in the home improvement process to help co-design our retrofit platform, basically, in the project management process. And because we start from the point of understanding the customer need rather than complying with an industry standard, everything we're building is to solve a need that the customer needs to ultimately get their project done rather than to deliver on PAS 2035. And it's just a different starting point that we're coming from. Even though we do take on the quality standards and like making sure it's independent advice, using design methods which are required in PAS 2035, we're implementing that standard for quality, but we don't talk about it in that same way with our customers. So a lot of the language that we use is intended to be more flexible and more kind of engaging with customers. So for those in the industry, some of you probably online at the moment, medium-term improvement plan, who on earth knows what that means? It's not really a customer-friendly term. We would call it a home energy plan, just a very basic thing. For us in our research, we found that literally nobody uses the word retrofit or knows what it is. Nobody's searching for it on Google either. We need to be looking at those kind of things about how people use language. The language they use is home energy improvements or home energy project, or it's a kind of small element in terms of the wider thing they're doing. So just as a starting point, we're not kind of pegged into using particular language because we don't need to comply with a certain way of talking, which is as rigid as it does get with some of these programs. And I think that does kind of hamper some of the impact that we're having, because particularly when you get over the marketing and comms and the delivery, we're using languages like retrofit coordinator as a term that people are really not familiar with at all. And it does create a lot of challenges. And then a little bit as well down the flexibility, it means that we're able to look at some of the other opportunities around kind of financing, funding, how to deliver those projects and the structure of those, which is a little bit more flexible than how it's done with PAS 2035 to more impact as well, and ultimately making sure we're delivering to those customer needs. But also kind of a core ethos is making sure we're doing it well with quality behind the scenes, but in a way that is engaging and supporting our customers all the way through. And the second question, Ellie, about the size of the opportunity, it's ginormous. I think if you take some very big numbers for the country, if you assume it's a £30,000 improvement that's required to every home, about 28 million homes, that's a market size of £718 billion. And then when we start looking down in terms of demographics and kind of where homes are at the moment in terms of EPC, so our target demographic of those at the moment who are considered self-funded, and then we have some other demographics behind the scenes, so we wouldn't necessarily anticipate people with a household income below kind of £70,000, £60,000 are really in this market. They need more support. It's still a market size of like 350 billion. It's ginormous. Haven't done those analytics in Birmingham specifically, but you can kind of see the opportunity. And I think although we are driven to deliver impact, I think what we aim to do is drive investment into this sector to build products and services which ultimately deliver a great outcome, and don't make retrofit something that is aspirational. It's something that's achievable to do for your home. And that's kind of everything that we're doing behind the scenes at Verve now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Becky. That was a really kind of helpful, detailed kind of response to that question. So I know I'm jumping around a little because obviously I want to engage all different kind of expertise around the panel, but we've had a couple of questions related to Procure Plus, Kevin, so I'm going to come to you next. But if I can just start with a kind of simple kind of question, just in terms of who is the Procure Plus DPS framework available to? I guess, is that just those who are involved in existing programs with the Combined Authority, or is there a broader reach and availability? And I guess my additional question would be the duration of that as a route to market as well would be a related question. And then I guess the kind of second part would be how can Procure Plus work with obviously what you've heard from both Birmingham's side and obviously the work that you're already doing, but expanding through in terms of the Combined Authority to help enable the supply chain to be ready for the opportunities that devolution provide. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first question in terms of the DPS and its availability, it's open to all. So housing providers, local authorities, councils. It's specifically designed to deal with these retrofit schemes. So dealing with multiple measures at pace, irrespective of the funding stream. Since it went live in June 2021, it started off very much as a Northwest DPS initially, and the first few call-offs were from there. But what we found very quickly was that we were able to deliver on these schemes because of the market engagement that we'd done, that we'd identified contractors who had experience of dealing with eco schemes, that they had transferable skills. It meant that we were able to get people into contract with the right type of contractors, and were then able to deliver on those schemes as well. Now, from our perspective, we're absolutely committed to retrofit and the scale of the challenge, and we acknowledge the size of the market and the size of the possibility there. And we also know as well that it's going to take many hands in order to deliver on this scheme. So for us, it's very much about supporting our clients, but also supporting the supply chain as well. So we do a significant amount of engagement with contractors to talk about opportunities that are in the pipeline for them as well, because what we don't want to do is to have organizations step into this field to get tender fatigue and then to step away from the market as well. There's enough work there for everybody. So from our perspective, from a client, any client is able to access it. They don't have to be part of the Combined Authority. They don't have to be part of the SHDF consortium. It is available to you. We have really significant coverage nationwide, but we are strong in the Midlands now because we've done a lot of market engagement. From a Procure Plus perspective, the conversations that we've had with the Combined Authority, they've been going on for about a year now. And every single time I've met a retrofit contractor, wherever they're based in the country, I've been talking about the scale of the challenge in the Midlands and trying to inject that opportunity there. And what we've been able to do is run two pretty significant tenders within the Midlands already, which have been really, really competitive. And on the back of that, some contractors from outside of the region have opened or are about to open regional offices within the Midlands, which is fantastic. From our perspective, as I said in my presentation, we're not for commercial profit. So we ensure that those social value commitments made by the contractors are being met. And we support them in that as well. So they've got an apprentice obligation, but we try and support them in finding good quality apprenticeships as best as we can. I mentioned the partnership with City and Guilds, which I think is a really, really fantastic scheme that we've got at the moment. You don't have to be a Procure Plus client in order to access that. If you've got a DLO at the moment, and you're looking to upskill your existing workers towards moving towards these new technologies, then we've got two pilot schemes which are going to be taking place in Coventry. We're huge on collaboration. So from our perspective, we will tell you some of the things that we've done previously, but we don't necessarily say that that is the only way to do it. And we're really interested in sitting down with people and understanding what those challenges are. And if we can create a bespoke solution for you, then that's what we love to do, because we see that that's something that other people can potentially move along with. Procure Plus, came about from collaboration within the Northwest. Northwest housing providers got together and put together this consortium, and I think that's one of the great things that we try and do, is always stress that need for collaboration, particularly with something like this where the size of the challenge is so significant. So we're going to be putting on any number of events in the Midlands over the next 12-18 months, where we would encourage anybody, whether they are a user of Procure Plus or not, to attend these meetings, because the best practice that you share, the worst practice that you share as well, is absolutely vitally important. But you know, it's still an emerging market. There are still new skills and new technologies. There are new people coming into there, and sharing that knowledge and experience is absolutely vital, because there are people who've dipped their toes into retrofit and had a really, really bad experience, and that's frightened them off. I think some of the mechanisms that there are in the market, some of the contractors are now in the market, would mean that if they went back into retrofit, they would have a very, very different experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think kind of your kind of closing remark, I think it reflects, again, what Becky was saying about the sheer scale of the market opportunity. There's every benefit for us actually across all the different places in which we sit in the retrofit industry, actually sharing our experiences, not keeping them close to our chest, because there is so much opportunity that we don't need to kind of keep our cards close, so to speak. So yeah, absolutely, that's really encouraging to hear that there's an opportunity for people to get involved. And just briefly before I move on, Kevin, to one of our next panel members, there was a question that came up around what flexibilities, and again, I'm coming back to that question around flexibility. There is within how your contractors are encouraged to work, to bring perhaps I think that the particular example was, if an air source heat pump has been specified, but actually that contractor believes there's actually greater merit in an alternative technology, is there a route through which those supply chain partners are encouraged to look at how they might generate greater value for money? Is there flexibility built within that process to encourage people to bring other options forward?
There absolutely is, yeah. And obviously, ultimately, it has to be client-led and it has to be client decision. But I don't think there's anybody who comes to the table who would say that they know absolutely everything about everything. We as well as the retrofit DPS, we have a low and zero carbon technologies framework where we have technology specific lots there, both for supply and installation of these materials. And if you come to Procure Plus with a very defined idea about how you want to do things, then that's what we will try and deliver. But if we are looking at an opportunity to talk to the market, then we have a really wide network of all the major suppliers, some of the smaller installers as well. Some of the regional events that I talked about, quite often we will bring a manufacturer in just to bring some of their kit down. So we've done events in Manchester where we've had an air source heat pump there, and we've literally taken it apart and put it back together again. And it's an opportunity to form those ideas and to form those opinions. So retrofit DPS is very much sort of front and center in terms of what we do. But as I say, we do have technology specific frameworks and lots available as well. So yeah, the DPS is designed to be flexible, that a client can choose their route to market. They can go turnkey, they can split services and installation, they could use a DPS and then procure contractor via the framework. It is designed for that. So if you come to us with a very specific idea of how you want to go about things, fantastic. But if you do want to have an engaged conversation, then we absolutely can facilitate that.
Great, thanks very much indeed. So I'm going to move on to a kind of more finance funding related or finance related question. There's been one of the questions in the chat relates to this, but also I wanted to just start with Anthony. So in the slideshow, in the kind of film that was shown around the work that Next Energy undertakes, there was a mention of blending finance together and blended finance. And I just wonder whether or not there are examples of where different pots of funding or indeed other investment opportunities have been successfully brought together to kind of maximize the overall benefit that's being achieved at a property level or even at a portfolio level. So I wondered if I could kind of ask that question over to you, Anthony. Oh, Anthony, can you hear us? Oh, it looks like we've lost him. Looks like he was just literally froze.
I was just gone. Sorry.
Are you back?
Yeah, kicked me out and just pulled me put my ear straight back in. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
Did you hear what I asked?
Yeah, it all. Yeah,
Perfect.
There is opportunity to blend funding. We have got obviously a specific example of our current contract that we deliver for a social housing provider. We've actually blended SHDF funding with eco for funding from a social housing perspective. So that opportunity is available to social housing providers as well. So what we've done was identify some properties that were off-gas properties within this particular social housing consortium that we were working with. So when we identified them ones, we ran them through the Eco4 model under for social housing, and so they would receive them free funding to the tune of about £250,000, I think it was, in sort of free fund that they received, in addition to the SHDF that they were delivering, which is mainly around the E to G properties on social housing properties. So you can blend eco funding with SHDF funding if the properties are there to be able to do so. And like I said, it's mainly around E to G rated properties. There is something that we can sort of look to, and from an extension point of view as well, we're quite we have quite a bit of pot of money as well to dip into for that, to deliver for eco funding in addition to the SHDF. So the opportunities are available if the properties are there. And it's a real bonus as well, because what that does then, it opens up, you spread your funding across more houses, more people are benefiting them from the grants that they're receiving. So and it's at no additional cost to the social housing provider as well. That just comes, we basically get them to sign a form and say they approve for us to deliver the works. We deliver the works, they get a sign-off form, so everything's complete, everything complies, it's been submitted to our funder, and then it's as simple as that. It's one document that they have to sign. And you can receive that free funding. So there is opportunity to blend funding, yeah.
Fantastic, thanks, Anthony. I think that's, I guess it's really important to look at opportunities for kind of maximising the value, and also whilst you are visiting, particularly if you are undertaking works that can be quite disruptive, to look at what you can do to maximise the activity you're undertaking there and then. And I'm sure there's a kind of maintenance kind of benefit to kind of looking at it in that kind of whole house way as well. Yeah. And with a kind of relative theme, and I'm not going to specifically kind of say for what any one particular person to come in with this. I mean, perhaps you could just kind of show a hand if you've got a kind of view on this. But this was directed towards kind of combined authority and local authority. But I'd be really interested in any panel member's view on where there is a package of measures and perhaps there is some funding available, probably more in the able to pay or the self-funded market. How can we all perhaps collectively work more in a collaborative way to try and deliver that retrofit still, even if there's a gap of funding? Is there a particular way in which we can think about how we work collaboratively to encourage that market to still receive those works, even if they can't get 100% of the funding from whatever route that might be that their own investment or be that through some other route? But would anyone like to kind of make a contribution to that? Becky, you've got your hand up, so over to you.
Obviously, I'm going to speak mainly about the self-funded market, but I'll also talk a little bit about the diatomic project and some of the findings there, because I think it's relevant as well. So just a quick mention about the stuff that we are doing about this. We come at it from a question of like, is finance actually going to help people start the retrofit project, and what kind of product are they looking for? And we're working on 3 Green Home Finance Accelerator programs. So one with NatWest, looking at green mortgages in particular, one with Scroll Finance, and it's quite a different product. It's called a HELOC. So it's kind of getting that line of credit. So if you've got a big project and only drawing down that loan when you actually start the work. And then we're also working with Carbon Adjust with Lendology as well, which is, it traditionally takes funds from local authorities and lends at a very low cost as well. And currently that's about 3.5%, which is obviously much lower than the current interest rate. And what we're looking to do there is understand which finance products get the best traction. And it's not just about brand, it's about interest rates, kind of how does that integrate within that process. But to take a bigger picture, that's obviously for people who are self-funded, who don't need that kind of grant blend. One of the findings that we had from the diatomic project, and it was a bigger kind of, our question was, is a retrofit one-stop shop in Birmingham feasible? And the key finding from that is we were looking obviously for self-funded, but people weren't able to find the funding they were looking for. There wasn't one place for them to go to give some information about themselves, which meant it would be clear which eligibility criteria they fulfill. So obviously we've heard about ECO and SHDF being blended together, but what about GBIS and HUG2 being blended together? You've got to be able to start at the top of that customer journey to be able to get the requirements from them to understand where they can be funneled, to be able to actually start bringing those funding pools together. And obviously there's stakeholder environments behind the scenes, which get really complicated. And George and Dan know in particular lots about that, about how you actually work effectively across organizations. But at the very top point, are we engaging people correctly, getting the information that we need to be able to do that blending? And that was one of the main findings from Diatomic, is that should be a starting point to make sure you can bring those together before even adding in private finance and blending it as well.
Thanks very much, Becky. And George, you wanted to come in on that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with Becky that it's really about understanding the customer base and what the needs and the opportunities are. I guess it's worth saying that SHDF projects, they're all blended funding anyway, because they're a mixture of housing provider funding and grant funding. So those already are, but the more criteria you add in, the harder it gets to blend those different funding sources. So that's one of the great benefits that I think we have with devolution, that we don't need to be as prescriptive around those things. So it might start to make it easier to bring in other sources of funding. So with the local net zero accelerator work that we're doing and talking about building a regional fund for retrofit, we see there being sort of three main areas of funding that could be blended together. So there's grant funding, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then you've got what we call return-seeking funding, but that's basically where it's the occupant of the building that pays back some of the cost over time, and that's paid back through energy savings. So a green deals type arrangement, funded through debt finance, and based on the fact that the savings over time outweigh the initial upfront investment and the cost of finance, so you're able to recoup some of the investment through that way. And then there's what we call outcome funding, which could still be debt funding, but it's where there's a third party that is willing to fund some of that cost on the basis that they benefit. So examples of this would be carbon credits. So there's already a developing carbon credit market for social housing, where people are willing to pay for the carbon savings. So it's not the householder that's paying, it's the carbon credit buyer that pays for that over time. That can bring more funding into projects, or could be the basis against which funding is borrowed. You've got a guaranteed revenue stream there. Energy infrastructure improvements. So if you need to spend less on upgrading infrastructure to improve the electricity grid because your demand is lower, is there a potential source of revenue there? And therefore that's someone else that's willing to pay for another outcome which isn't the occupant that's paying for it. And then healthcare savings or other sort of benefits, and there are lots of, the one that we're focusing on is healthcare, because we feel that it's hard to do, but we feel that's the area that will have the biggest impact potentially on people's lives, particularly given that West Midlands has some of the, if not the worst fuel poverty rates in the country. That's where we can really achieve a lot of benefit to ultimately the public purse. Is there an option where we get the money up front and then that's paid back through healthcare savings or benefits over time? So that's a sort of an examples of outcome funding. The purpose of the fund is to bring all of those together, understand what the different investor requirements are, and ensure that the activities that are undertaken through those projects align with investor requirements, and also the data that's gathered is consistent and helps to support the business case or demonstrate to investors that they are getting a return on their investment. That's the sort of challenge we have, and what we're looking to do over the next few years. But yeah, I think the feeling is that it needs to be done outside of at the fund level potentially, rather than the project level, to allow projects to access that funding more easily. Certainly shouldn't be done anywhere near the householder level, because it's just too complex and too difficult, and you need to understand what those opportunities and requirements are from occupants of buildings in order to understand what kind of funding solutions can be put forward. So as part of that fund infrastructure, you'd need to have a sort of pipeline development service or project service. This is going out, helping to develop the pipelines, identify the customers, and work out what the likely returns are.
Fantastic. Thanks, George. I'm conscious of time, and I'm really keen to bring Russell in. And obviously, you obviously got a contribution. So, if I can use panel chairperson's privilege a little, could I ask if all of our panelists are happy to stay for another maybe 5-10 minutes maximum? In which case we can bring some more contributions in. Kevin, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump to Russell to give him an opportunity to kind of come in, I guess, firstly, to perhaps give you reflections on both what Becky and George were mentioning, but
Sure.
Also I'll come back to you with a question I was keen to ask as well of your platform and your experience. So Russell, do you want to kind of come back and reflect on that previous question, and then I'll come back in?
Yeah, cool. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're a little quiet, but I think we're all good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, George, what you just said is music to my ears, really. We just finished a piece of work for Cheshire East, Cheshire West and Warrington, looking at this exact question. We actually put a figure on the amount of cash there is available to draw down on for an investor to put into a place-based retrofit program across tenure. And that figure was 75 million per annum if it was a very small share of the savings that were available across the piece. If public health, social care, the DNO, and all of those people that have a vested interest in it, the common denominator of better housing, were to come together and actually use housing as a vehicle for change. Interestingly, we didn't take any money from the NHS as part of that saving, because frankly, they need more than they've got. But clearly there's a reflected benefit of having a better performance in homes for them, which we all recognise. But 75 million a year, we wouldn't need that to set up a one-stop shop in that particular part of the country. You wouldn't need anywhere near that. So some of the work that we do for a range of local authorities and regional governments is to do the business case work and put the financial models in place to create those one-stop shop models. And even if you were going, well, you have to look at it in the terms of the relatively low numbers of deal flow in order for it to self-sustain, but you'd be looking at around about £1 million to set something up, and for the cash flow to be there in order to keep it going until the deal flow is such that it self-sustains. Something like Cozy Homes Oxfordshire, which has been working for 5 or 6 years now, self-sustaining on that basis. But one of those benefits comes out of just better planning. And George outlined there that a team that would look at the packages and the offers. A one-stop shop in and of itself is not going to self-sustain unless you're targeting an offer to a householder that they recognise and want to buy. And we've come up with this concept of a strategic retrofit coordination team. Almost like the retrofit coordinator in a home is not necessarily an expert in one technology or all technologies, but they understand all of them and how they will work together. A strategic retrofit coordinator would do that across all of those currently completely separate sectors, but would look at it from the perspective of the home as a common denominator, and would realise that cash, and would talk to the UK Infrastructure Bank that want to lend on a model like that, but they have no language to work with right now. And that language is data, as George said, having the collaborative mechanisms to allow data to be collected in the right way, that you can, in the first instance, design various programs that would attract either social landlords, owner-occupiers, private landlords, whatever, into those particular markets. But then you can share the data on success as you move through, and people can realise those savings, and that model would take a share of that saving that hopefully you've agreed on beforehand, rather than having a row about it afterwards. So there's a maturity to go through here, but certainly that piece of work, we're putting a white paper out in a couple of weeks on that. I'm very happy to share with people on that. But I think the key thing, one of the key things that came out of, so I mentioned efficiency, just very quickly, Ellie. We work with a landlord in the Northwest for 7,500 properties. We've got a new tool called Portfolio Plus, which allows us to put a time dimension on our stock model. And basically, it's an algorithm that puts all of the measures that they have to put into these properties, not just on retrofit, but on fire safety, on decent homes, puts them into the least cost order of retrofit. And we've identified £22.5 million worth of saving for that one landlord just by planning better. So immediately where you might have some parties that are against PAS 2035 because it adds cost. Well, this is saying the absolute opposite. You need to do better planning, put more resource into doing it, better data, get very high coverage of EPCs in the first place so that you've got that data. If you do that planning, you're realizing those savings in the long term. So it's going against the narrative that there is out there at the moment about all this stuff is slowing us down. This is big time money, and It's there because we need to collaborate.
No, that's really interesting, and I think as I say, I am conscious of time, and I think this probably will have to be our kind of last question, but I think it just perhaps expands a little, Russell, on that point that you were just making. And I was reflecting on the fact that some organisations have got excellent data and probably an excess of it. Others perhaps don't feel they've got very good data at all. And I wondered whether or not you could just kind of reflect back on whether or not are we really data poor, or is it just an issue of how we gather and capture and analyze it that's the challenge, rather than the quantum and level of detail that we've got?
We're data strategy poor. We kind of think we just need to get hold of whatever data is available and then start working with it, but we don't ever put a policy in place. I don't see our clients of ours putting a policy in place and until they've spent a bit of time with us necessarily. That means that they've got a plan to continually collect data and see that over time that they've got better data for every property. You can make decisions on low confidence data. That's one of the things that we do within our pathways analysis and our portfolio tools. We give an indication to our clients of the level of confidence we have in their data. For some areas of a stock, you would have very high confidence. If you just finished a particular program that's had post-install EPCs, you've got high confidence in that data. You know how to make a good decision in that particular estate next time. But you'll have other areas where the confidence is low, but you can make some decisions. You can decide whether those are areas you need to concentrate on. And if they are particularly important for you because the DNO has said you can't install any heat pumps because the grid's creaking, or whether you've got a very high quantum of vulnerable customers, well, that's where you do your surveys. Go and do your stock condition modelling, stock condition surveys, high proportion of EPCs. That's where you start, and that's a data strategy. That's not have I got good data or not. You need to work through that. So that would be my suggestion. Have an idea of the confidence levels of the quality of the data and build a strategy around the data, and then you can start working on a retrofit strategy. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark.
No, very wise words. Thank you very much, Russell. So, I mean, as much as there's such a wealth of knowledge around this virtual table, I am conscious of time and that we've already extended this a little beyond the allotted time. But I guess it's really kind of just remains from my perspective at least, and obviously I'll hand back to kind of Graham as well, to just say thank you very much to all of the panel members. Both for the time in kind of preparing and contributing to obviously the presentations that we heard beforehand, but also for joining us here in this panel session and being so kind of free with your kind of expertise in sharing that kind of far and wide as well. We obviously have got another 2 days of engagements to kind of delve into some of the other specific topics. But there were a couple of quite specific questions, I think one for you, George, one for you, Dan, in the chat. If there is a chance for you to just either give a quick bit of feedback on those points, that would be really, really welcome. And obviously, if there's anything that's cropped up that I've not looked at since the last kind of 5 or 10 minutes, if there are any others there and there's a chance to feed in, that would be fantastic. But is it back over to you, Graham, or is it out into breakouts? But thank you again.